Chapter 8. It is supposed that astronomic subjects and principles and methods cannot be understood by the layman. I think this is myself. We shall take up some of the principles of astronomy with the idea of expressing that of course they cannot be understood by the unhypnotized any more than can the stories of Noah's Ark and Jonah and the whale be understood, but that our understanding, if we have any, will have some material for its exercises just the same. The velocity of light is one of these principles. A great deal in the astronomic system depends upon the supposed velocity. Determinations of distance and the amount of aberration depend. It will be our expression that these are ratios of impositions to mummeries, with such clownish products that formulas turn into antics, and we shall have scruples against taking up the subject at all, because we have much hard work to do, and we have qualms against stopping so often to amuse ourselves. But then, sometimes in a more sentimental mood, I think that the pretty story of the velocity of light and its determination will some day be of legitimate service, be rhymed some day and told to children in future kindergartens, replacing the story of Little Bo Peep with the tale of a planet that lost its satellites and sometimes didn't know where to find them, but that good magicians came along and formulated the indeterminable. It was found by Roemer, a 17th century astronomer, that at times the moons of Jupiter did not disappear behind him and did not emerge from behind him when they should. He found that as distance between this Earth and Jupiter increased, the delays increased. He concluded that these delays represented times consumed by the light of the moons in traveling greater distances. He found, or supposed he found, that when this Earth is farthest from Jupiter, light from a satellite is seen 22 minutes later than when nearest Jupiter. Given measurement of the distance between opposite points in the Earth's supposed orbit and time consumed in traveling this distance, there you have the velocity of light. I still say that it is a pretty story and should be rhymed, but we shall find that astronomers might as well try to formulate the gambols of the sheep of Little Bo Peep as to try to formulate anything depending upon the satellites of Jupiter. In the Annals of Philosophy 23-29, Colonel Beaufry writes that upon December 7, 1823, he looked for the emergence of Jupiter's third satellite at the time set down in the National Almanac. For 2 hours he looked and did not see the satellite emerge. In Monthly Notices 44-8, an astronomer writes that upon the night of October 15, 1883, one of the satellites of Jupiter was 46 minutes late. A paper was read at the meeting of the British Astronomical Association, February 8, 1907, upon a satellite that was 20 minutes late. In Telescopic Work, page 191, W.F. Denning writes that upon the night of September 12, 1889, he and two other astronomers could not see satellite 4 at all. See the Observatory 9-237 Satellite 4 disappeared 15 minutes before calculated time. About a minute later, it reappeared, disappeared again, reappeared 9 minutes later. For Todd's observations, see the Observatory 2-227 6 times between June 9th and July 2nd, 1878. A satellite was visible when, according to prediction, it should have been invisible. For some more instances of extreme... damn little flies. All right, hold on. Where was I? For some more instances of extreme vagaries of these satellites, see Monthly Notices 43-427 and Journal BAA 14-27. Observations by Noble, Turner, White, Holmes, Freeman, Goodacre, Ellis, and Molesworth. In periodical astronomical publications, there is no more easily findable material for heresy than such observations. We shall have other instances. They abound in the English Mechanic, for instance, but in spite of a host of such observations, Professor Young says that the time occupied by light coming from these satellites is doubtful by only a fraction of a second. It is, of course, another instance of the astronomers who know very little of astronomy. It would have been undignified if the astronomers had taken the sheep of Little Bo Peep for their determinations. They took the satellites of Jupiter. They said that the velocity of light is about 190,000 miles a second. So did physicists. Our own notion is that there is no velocity of light, that one sees a thing or doesn't, that if the satellites of Jupiter behave differently according to the proximity to this Earth, that may be because this Earth affects them. So affecting them because the planets may not, as we may find, be at 1,000th part of the demonstrated distances. The notion of velocity of light finds support, we're told, in the textbooks in the velocity of sound. If it does, it doesn't find support in gravitational effects because, according to the same textbooks, gravitational effects have no velocity. The physicists agreed with the astronomers. A beam of light is sent through and is reflected back through a revolving shutter, but it's complex and we're simple. God, hold on. Little bastard. I'm going to get it. Anyways, we shall find that there is no need to go into the details of this mechanism. It is not that a machine is supposed to register a velocity of 186,000 miles a second, or we'd have to be technical. It is that the eye is supposed to perceive. And there is not a physicist in the world who can perceive when a parlor magician palms off playing cards, hearing or feeling, or if one could smell light, some kind of a calm might be made. But the well-known limitations of seeing, common knowledge of little boys, that a brand waved about in the dark cannot be followed by the eyes. The limit of the perceptible is said to be 10 changes a second. I think of the astronomers as occupying a little vortex of their own in the cosmic swoon in which wave all things, at least in this one supposed solar system. Call it a swoon or call it hypnosis, but that it is never absolute, and that all of us sometimes have awareness of our condition and moments of wondering what it's all about and why we do and think the things that sometimes we wake up and find ourselves doing and thinking. Upon page 281, Old and New Astronomy, Richard Proctor awakens momentarily and says, "The agreement between these results seems close enough, but those who know the actual difficulty of precise time observations of the phenomena of Jupiter's satellites, to say nothing of the present condition of the theory of their motions, can place very little reliance on the velocity of light deduced from such observations." Upon pages 603 to 607, Proctor reviews some observations other than those that I have listed. Satellites that have disappeared, come back, disappeared, return again, so bewilderingly that he wrote what we have quoted. Observations by Gorton, Ray, Gambart, Secchi, Main, Grover, Smith, Mackler-Person, Hodgson, Carlisle, Simonton. And that is the last of his awareness. Proctor then swoons back into his hypnosis. He then takes up the determination of the velocity of light with the physicists as if they could be relied upon, accepting every word, writing his gospel, glorying in this miracle of science. I call it a tainted agreement between the physicists and the astronomers. I prefer mild language. If by a method by which nothing could be found out, the astronomers determined that the velocity of light is about 190 miles a second, 190,000 miles a second, and if the physicists by another method found out about the same result, what kind of harmony can that be other than the reekings of two consistent stenches? Proctor wrote that very little reliance could be placed upon anything depending upon Jupiter's satellites, and it never occurred to him to wonder by what miracle the physicists agreed with these unreliable calculations. It is the situation that repeats in the annals of astronomy, a baseless thing that is supposed to have a foundation slipped under it, wedged in, or God knows how introduced or foisted. I Prefer not to bother much with asking how the physicists could determine anything of a higher number of changes than 10 per second. If it be accepted that the physicists are right, the question is, by what miracle were the astronomers right if they had very little to rely upon? Determinations of planetary distances and determinations of velocity of light have squirmed together. They represent either an agreeable picture of cooperation or a study in mutual support by writhing infamies. With most emphasis, I have taken the position that the vagaries of the Jovian satellites are so great that extremely little reliance can be placed upon them. But now it seems to me that the emphasis should be upon the admission that, in addition to these factors and indeterminateness, it was, up to Proctor's day, not known with anything like accuracy when the satellite should appear and disappear. In that case, one wonders as to the state of the theory of Roemer's day. It was in the mind of Roemer that the two determinations we are now considering first most notably satisfied affinity. Mutual support by velocity of light and distances in the supposed solar system. Upon his third law, which, as we shall see later, he constructed upon at least three absences of anything to build upon. Kepler had, upon observations upon Mars, deduced 13 million miles as this Earth's distance from the Sun. By the same method, which is now discredited method of simultaneous observations, Roemer determined that this distance to be 82 million miles. I am not concerned with this great discrepancy so much as with the astronomers' reasons for starting off distances in millions instead of hundreds of or thousands of miles. Kepler's day, the strongest objection urged against the Copernican system was that if this Earth moves around the sun, the stars should show annual displacements, and it is only under modern refinements that the stars do so minutely vary, perhaps. The answer to this objection was that the stars are vastly farther away than was commonly supposed. Entailed by this answer was the necessity of enlarging upon common suppositions generally. Kepler determined or guessed just as one pleases, and then Roemer outdid him. Roemer was followed by Huygens, who continued outdoing. 100 million, according to Huygens. Huygens took for this basis his belief that this Earth is intermediate in size to Mars and Venus. Astronomers today say that this Earth is not so intermediate. We see that in the secondary phase of development, the early astronomers, with no means of knowing whether the sun is 1,000 or 1,000,000 miles away, guessed or determined such distances as 82 million miles and 100 million miles to account for the changelessness of the stars. If the mean of these extremes is about the distance of present dogmas, we'd like to know by what miracle a true distance so averages two products of wild methods. Our expression is that these developments had their origin in conspiracy and prostitution, if one has a fancy for such accusations, or if everybody else had been so agreeable, we think more amiably ourselves that it was all a matter of comfortably adjusting and being obliging all around. Our expression is that ever since the astronomers have seen and have calculated as they should see and should calculate. For instance, when this Earth's distance from the sun was supposed to be 95 million miles, all astronomers taking positions of Mars calculated a distance of 95 million miles. But then when the distance was cut down to about 92 million miles, all astronomers taking positions of Mars calculated about a distance of 92 million miles. It may sound like a cynicism of mine, but in saying this, I am quoting Richard Proctor in one of his lucid suspicions. Old and New Astronomy, page 280. With nothing but monotony and with nothing that looks like relief for us, the data of conspiracy or of cooperation continue. Upon worthless observations upon the transits of Venus, 1761 and 1769, this Earth's orbit was found by Encke to be about 190 million miles across. Distance of the sun, about 95 million miles. Altogether, progress had been more towards the wild calculations of Huygens than towards the undomesticated calculations of Roemer. So, to agree with this change, if not progress, Delambre takes worthless observations upon the satellites of Jupiter, cut down Roemer's worthless determinations, and announced that light crosses the plane of the Earth's orbit in 16 minutes and 32 seconds, as it ought to, Professor Young would say. It was then that the agreeably tainted physicists started spinning and squinting, calculating independently. We're told that Delambre was right. Everything's settled. Everybody's comfortable. See Chambers' Handbook of Astronomy, published at this time, that the sun's distance had been ascertained with great accuracy to be 95,298,260 miles. But then occurred something that is badly but protectively explained in most astronomical works. Foucault interfered with the deliciousness of those 95,298,260 miles. One may read many books that mention this subject, and one will always read that Foucault, the physicist, by an independent method or by an absolutely independent method, disagreed somewhat. This disagreement is paraded so that one has an impression of painstaking independent scientists not utterly slavishly supporting one another, but at the same time keeping well over the 90 million mark, and so essentially agreeing after all. But we find that there was no independence in Foucault's experiments. We come across the same old disgusting connivance, or the same amiable complacence, perhaps. See Clarke's History of Astronomy, page 230. We learned that astronomers, to explain oscillations of the sun, had decided that the sun must be not 95,280,260 miles away, but about 91 million miles away. 91 million miles. 91 million. To oblige them, perhaps, or innocently, never having heard of them, perhaps, though for 10 years they had been announcing that a new determination was needed. Foucault found that the velocity of light is less than had been necessary to suppose, when the sun was supposed to be about 95 million miles away, and he found the velocity to be exactly what it should be, supposing the sun to be 91 million miles away. Then it was that the astronomers announced that, not that they, shit, it's fucking million miles shit. Then it was that the astronomers announced not that they had cut down the distance of the sun because of observations upon solar oscillations, but because they had been very much impressed by the independent observations upon the velocity of light by Foucault, the physicist. The squirm occurred at the meeting of the Royal Astronomical Society, February 1864. There would have to be more squirms. If, then, the distance across this Earth's orbit was found to be less than Delambre had supposed, somebody would have to find that light comes from the satellites of Jupiter a little slower than Delambre had proved, whereupon Glassnape found that the time is 16 minutes and 40 seconds, which is what he should or ought to find, whereupon there would have to be readjustment of Encke's calculations of distance of the sun upon worthless observations upon transits of Venus, and whereupon again Newcomb went over the very same observations by Encke, had compelled agreement with the dogmas of his day, and Newcomb calculated as was required that the distance agreed with Foucault's reduction. Whether, in the first place, Encke ever did calculate as he said he did or not, his determination was mere agreement with Laplace's in the 7th book of the Mécanique Céleste. Of course, he said that he had calculated independently because his method was by triangulation and Laplace's was the gravitational. that the word worthless does not apply to observations upon transits of Venus. In Old and New Astronomy, Proctor says that the observations upon the transit of 1761 and 1769 were altogether unsatisfactory. One supposes that anything that is altogether unsatisfactory can't be worth much. In the next transit of 1874, various nations cooperated. The observations were so disappointing that the Russian, Italian, and Austrian governments refused to participate in the expedition of 1882. In Reminiscences of an Astronomer, page 181, Newcomer says that the United States Commission, of which he was secretary, had up to 1902 never published in full its observations, and probably never would, because by that time all other members were either dead or upon the retired list. Methods of Mars, more monotony because of criticisms of taking of parallax by simultaneous observations. Dr. David Gill went to the island of Ascension during the opposition of Mars of 1877 to determine alone by the diurnal method the distance of this Earth from the Sun from positions of Mars. For particulars of Gill's method, see, for instance, Poor's solar system, page 86. Here, Professor Poor says that, of course, the orbital motion of Mars had to be allowed for in Gill's calculations. If so, then, of course, this Earth's orbital motion had to be allowed for. If Dr. Gill knew the space traversed by this Earth in its orbit and the curvature of its path, he knew the size and shape of the orbit and consequently the distance from the Sun. Took for the basis of his allowance that this Earth is about 93 million miles from the Sun and calculated that this Earth is about 93 million miles from the Sun. For this classic deduction from the known to the same known, he received a gold medal. In our earlier surveys, we were concerned with the false claim that there can be application of celestial mechanics to celestial phenomena, but as to later subjects, the method is different. The method of these calculations is triangulation. One simple question: to what degree can triangulation be relied upon? To great degree in measuring the height of a building or in the little distances of a surveyor's problems. Hold on. To what degree can triangulation be relied upon? Great degree in measuring the height of a building or in the little distances of a surveyor's problems. It is clear enough that astronomers did not invent the telescope. They adopted the spectroscope from another science. Their primary mathematical principle of triangulation they have taken from the surveyors to whom it is serviceable. The triangle is another emblem of the sterility of the science of astronomy. Upon the coat of arms of this great mule of the sciences, I would draw a prism within a triangle.